I'm sure you've heard what brutal fate El Cholo suffered in his final hours after betraying the CJNG. But what about El Chapo's son? What did he do to deserve such a vicious assassination in broad daylight? And most importantly, what happened in his final hours? The Heir. The Sinaloa cartel is often referred to as the world's biggest and most powerful drug trafficking organization. It has a vast network of operations spanning the globe, and it's responsible for smuggling billions of dollars worth of drugs each year. An empire of such influence and power indeed needs an heir to carry on its legacy, and El Chapo has picked his firstborn and most favorite son to be his successor, Edgar Guzman Lopez. May 30th, 1986. From the moment he opened his eyes, Edgar found himself surrounded by power, influence, and danger lurking in every corner. As El Chapo's oldest son from his first wife, Griselda Lopez Perez, Edgar was groomed to be involved in his father's criminal activities from a very young age. Growing up on a ranch in the Mexican city of Jesus Maria, he was trained with a group of young sicarios under his father's command. And even as a teenager, rumors circulated that he oversaw some of the Sinaloa cartel's drug operations. And despite being the crowned prince of a ruthless empire, Edgar was known for his humility and calm demeanor. And on top of that, he was also ambitious. He completed early education in a government school and was studying for a degree in business administration. Edgar was part of a new generation of drug traffickers known in Mexico as narco juniors. Second-generation narcos have long existed in Mexico, nearly as long as the business, but since the 1970s, the sons and daughters of kingpins have been taking a different route. Instead of simply following in their predecessors' footsteps right away, they've been increasingly attending top schools, sometimes even foreign ones, in order to learn business better. All these remarkable qualities, along with his father's trust, led to Edgar being selected as the next leader of the Sinaloa cartel. However, fate had other plans in store for Edgar, for tragically his life was brutally cut short before he even reached the age of 22. The Prince is dead. May 8th, 2008. Mother's Day was just around the corner, and Edgar was eagerly preparing a grand surprise for his beloved mother. He'd gone to a shopping center in Culiacan, Sinaloa, to pick up some groceries for the big celebration. Accompanying him were his cousin, Cesar Ariel Lora, and his friend, Arturo Meza Cazares, son of Blanca Margarita Cazares, also known as the Empress, who the U.S. government identified as a money launderer for the Sinaloa cartel. As the three men walked out of the shopping center and into the parking lot, they were met with a deafening bang and a horrific sight. A sign on the upper wall of the shopping center, only a few inches above their heads, burst into flames after being hit by a bazooka. Over 40 heavily armed men, brandishing AK-47 rifles and donning bulletproof vests, jumped out of their vehicles with deadly intent. The three young men attempted to flee to their two trucks, one of which was armored, but their efforts were in vain. Without warning, the assailants unleashed a barrage of bullets at point-blank range, firing over 500 rounds at the helpless victims, snuffing out their lives. The ruthless assassins made a swift escape in their pickup trucks, leaving behind the completely unrecognizable bodies of three men lying in a pool of their own blood. Let's just say there's more to Edgar's death than you would think. More on that later. Anyways, the news of Edgar's death shook the entire nation. The grief that consumed his father, El Chapo, was so immense that he ordered the purchase of every single rose in Culiacan for Edgar's funeral. This left vendors with no time to restock flowers for Mother's Day, but El Chapo's sorrow was too great to consider anyone else's needs. During the funeral, a famous Mexican artist performed a corrido titled 50,000 Roses, which was told from El Chapo's point of view, depicting his immense sorrow. My sons are my source of happiness as well as my sadness. Edgar, I will miss you. You were my confidant, my right-hand man. Edgar's mother, on the other hand, was engulfed with rage. She spoke to the Mexican media, expressing her frustration at the constant labeling of her children as drug traffickers. She was tired of being associated with her husband's notorious reputation and wanted to distance herself and her family from it. As for the people of Sinaloa, they were also fearful of the aftermath and the potential retribution from El Chapo for his son's death. They voluntarily decided to maintain a curfew, confining themselves within the safety of their own homes for days. And the question on everyone's mind was, who would dare to kill the son of a man infamous for dissolving his enemies in acid? Perhaps someone as vile, or maybe someone on a mission, carrying out an order he could never say no to. A tangled web of violence. The blame for Edgar's killing was initially placed on the Juarez cartel. And given the ongoing fierce conflict between the Juarez and Sinaloa cartels in Culiacan and Navolato, it kinda made sense. This war of drug empires provided a plausible explanation. However, Frida Munoz Roman, the widow of El Chapo's son, publicly declared that the perpetrators responsible for her husband's murder, which left their young daughter fatherless, were hitmen associated with the Beltran Leyva brothers. And now you must be thinking, who exactly are the Beltran Leyva brothers? And why would they want El Chapo's son dead? Beltran Leyva brothers, Hector, Alfredo, and Arturo, were notorious figures in the Mexican underworld. The brothers grew in power around the mid-1980s. However, for the next couple of decades, they remained as secondary characters in the drug trafficking world. Arturo Beltran Leyva was the head of the family. He and his brothers worked for years as hired guns for the man himself, El Chapo, and eventually became his business associates. Not only that, but when El Chapo was locked up in a max security prison, the brothers helped ensure his incarceration was as luxurious as possible until El Chapo finally broke out of jail in 2001. So, what changed? When one of the brothers, Alfredo, was arrested in early 2008, Arturo accused El Chapo of turning him in. This marked the official split between the brothers and El Chapo. They broke away from the Sinaloa cartel and formed their own organization, aligning themselves with the biggest rivals of the Sinaloa cartel, including Los Zetas. This decision set off a series of deadly turf wars, and the brothers, especially Arturo, gained a reputation for grotesque bloodthirstiness. And only a few months later, Edgar was assassinated, and many believed it was more than just a coincidence. Yet, that was one of two theories. The second theory suggests that the sicarios responsible for Edgar's demise were led by none other than one of his father's henchmen. An anonymous gunman from the Sinaloa cartel told a Mexican newspaper that Edgar's death was a mistake.
We know we're going to pay, because even though mistakes happen, and sometimes they might not be anybody's fault, they still have to be paid for, and in this case, only death will cover this mistake.
It is believed that El Chapo himself ordered the execution of a young man named Israel Rincon, also known as El Gacho, due to his association with the Beltran brothers. The responsibility for carrying out this operation fell upon Gonzalo Inzanza, famously known as El Macho Prieto, the chief assassin of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, El Chapo's partner in crime and co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel. Communication, instructions, and inquiries were exchanged through radios, setting the stage for the impending tragedy. Fate also played a cruel hand, as El Gacho happened to be present in the same shopping center as Edgar and his friends on that fateful night. It was around 8:30 p.m., and darkness had enveloped the city. And so, when the three young men exited the shopping center, El Macho mistakenly assumed they were El Gacho and his associates. And without a second thought, he ordered his men to open fire on him, turning the whole situation into a catastrophic case of mistaken identity. A lot of people believe this is the most credible possibility, as it was later discovered that the weaponry used in the killings bore a striking resemblance to that favored by El Macho Prieto. I can't really help but wonder about the turmoil that must have consumed El Chapo upon learning that his beloved son had fallen victim to an order he himself had issued. But speaking of El Chapo, aren't you also wondering what he did to avenge his son? Well, technically nothing, and his delayed response left everyone in shock. At that time, a Mexican journalist even wrote that the Sinaloa cartel boss seemed to have become merciful after the death of his son, as there were no reprisals. But with everything you know about El Chapo, do you really think he's the kind of man that would just sit around and do nothing? I certainly don't. Death comes for all. Only a few months after Edgar's death, Arturo Beltran Leyva went into hiding after learning that authorities from Mexico and the US were working exceptionally hard to find him, and it didn't take long before they did. December 16, 2009, Arturo Beltran Leyva was greeted by 200 Mexican Marines, a Navy helicopter, and 2 small Army tanks. In an ensuing shootout that lasted about 4 hours, Arturo was finally shot dead, and his body was left at the scene riddled with multiple wounds. Kinda sounds like a coincidence, no? Wait until you hear about what happened to El Macho. December 18, 2013. A special task force made up of hundreds of Marines and federal police clawed its way throughout the city where El Macho was suspected to be hiding, and after finding his safe house, they unleashed a relentless storm of bullets upon it. The gunfight lasted for hours, with both sides exchanging heavy fire until El Macho was finally gunned down. Don't you just find it eerily odd that the 2 men were killed in exactly the same way? I can't help but wonder if these similarities are just a coincidence, or if they're a sign that El Chapo was involved in both of them. After all, we know that El Chapo has many hands that reach far into the Mexican police, and from where we see it, El Chapo decided to get his revenge by orchestrating his minions without getting his hands dirty. It was his order that sealed Edgar's fate, and it was also his order that sealed the fate of those suspected of having his blood on their hands. If you want to know more about El Macho Prieto and the events leading to his death, check out this video.